Hey everyone, welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. I know we are slowly but surely getting some folks in here. So excited to have y'all. We have 3 job descriptions to go through and 3 resumes to talk through today. So I'm really excited. Hopefully I got all the personal information out of them. It was interesting. One of my friends who submitted a resume, they're like, our bosses are like trolling the internet right now to see if we're applying for jobs. And I was like, I feel like that's a really unhealthy environment. Like,
yeah, get out.
That's why you're leaving, right?
Yeah, I was like, well, to be fair. So, yeah, really exciting, really interesting. We're going to get into all the great things. As always, we're going to have a great discussion, great conversation. I would love to learn who's here in the audience. If you want to drop your location into the chat, tell us where you're coming from. I'm coming from hot and dry Lubbock, Texas. Caitlin, you are coming from Scottsdale, right?
Yep, that's correct.
How hot is it today?
You know, we're having soon come through, so it's actually like, I think high 90s, which for us right now. So I'll take it while I can.
Nice and cool. Yeah, exactly. You know, I should have asked my mom. I was just talking with her, and my parents still live out there, and she was like, oh yeah, you know, nothing's changed. But there's a big difference between 90 and 120. So, you know, your legs just stick that much more to your car, the interior of your car, so that's fun. Dan, you're coming from sunny Seattle. What does that even mean for Seattle?
See, one of my favorite trivia facts about Seattle is during the Major League Baseball season, Seattle usually ranks in the bottom 3 teams for rainfall. And so everybody thinks it rains here all the time, but the reality is from November until sometime in March, yes, it does rain every day, but the rest of the year is beautiful. So.
Yeah, I think you can really blame Grey's Anatomy for this idea of constant rain. So,
or any movie shot in Seattle has to be like, well, it's Seattle, so let's not show the beautiful side. Let's show the gray, dark side.
Absolutely. And Richard, San Francisco. You know, I haven't been out there in a while.
Way over in the East Bay, sort of past Berkeley and towards Walnut Creek, if people know it. But it's easy to just say San Francisco. So glad to be here. Been a while since I've done Sales Hacker, so I'm excited.
A little bit. Yeah, it has been a little bit. Well, I'm excited for us to jump into it. So just a reminder for everyone that's here, we are talking all about how do you get the dream job that you're looking for. We're going to be workshopping some job descriptions from top software companies. We are going to be workshopping some resumes from literally everyone. We've got individual reps all the way to VPs of sales. So hopefully everyone will be able to leave us some good nuggets. But as we get started, I'm actually going to launch a poll. We want to know a little bit more about you. Are you currently looking for a new job? Are you browsing just to look? You know, I've always been a really big believer of, you know, always be interviewing. You never know. So keep an eye out. Are you interviewing? Are you just thinking about it? And if you don't fit into this, where do you fit? So I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay. Let's see here. Well, it looks like we've got a lot of folks here. Final stages of interviews. Congratulations, Jennifer. That's awesome. We have a lot of folks in here that are actively applying. Some are just browsing around. Many of you are just starting off. So hopefully this will be really helpful. So the first thing that we wanted to jump into today is whenever we're talking about I'm sorry, I lied. That's not what we're going to do. Whenever we jump into this, we're going to start through really understanding what looks well for resumes, what looks well for job descriptions, what are some traps you should look out for. You know, we always hear about the work hard, play hard vocabulary use in those job descriptions. What does that even mean? And then we're going to jump into like understanding how to apply, when to apply, and then what to do with interviews. But before we get started with that, I want us to introduce our amazing panel. I know you found out where they live, but Richard, I'll start with you. Tell us who you are, what do you do, and one fun interviewing fact.
Interviewing fact?
Yeah. So either like the craziest question you've ever been asked, craziest question you've ever asked,
yeah,
craziest interview situation.
So, my name is Richard Harris. I am a sales trainer teaching reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask and when. Do advisory stuff on the side, separate, and sales ops. But best question, it's not my story, but I'm going to tell it because I think it's just too good. A friend of mine went to an interview and the person said, here, sell me this pen, right? And it was the old school message. my buddy literally took it and broke it and said, guess you need a new pen. And he did not get the job because but I was just like, that's a classic answer. I love that one. So anyway, that's my best interview question story.
I love that. We are so happy that you are here. Caitlin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your interview story as well.
Yes. So I'm Caitlin McMahon. I am the manager of candidate experience for Aspireship. And let's see, this is a good question. I feel like we should have prepped on this a little bit because I've been through multiple interviews, but I think, thinking about the things that I guess I would want to steer clear from or would be red flags are, the typical and hypothetical of like, if you could be any animal, tell me what you would be, and any questions that are not specifically relevant to understanding more about your background or pertaining a little bit more to the job. So I think that comes up commonly for, areas. I still hear about it of candidates sharing that they have had some wonky interview questions out there. And from my own personal take, I think that that's not a real valuable use of time through the process. So I guess in the spirit of knowing that still happens, that would be one that I would cause like a red flag, red alert. Let's maybe look at other options.
I love that. I remember a tech company, if I said the name, y'all would know who it is, and it would surprise you. But one of the questions was, what kitchen appliance am I most like and why? And I was like, what? And I came up with the stupidest answer. And because no one preps you to like answer questions like that. Yeah. And I felt like this should have been a BuzzFeed quiz or something. And I responded with the KitchenAid mixer because there's so many different attachments. I'm so versatile and efficient that I can do anything. I can wear all the hats. And I thought that was a pretty good answer, but I was like, what does that have to do with, is this objection handling practice? I don't know.
Just catches you off guard.
It's so weird. Okay, Dan, tell us about yourself and your weirdest situation.
Yeah. So I've been in recruiting for, about 25 years. I lead recruiting for Outreach, but I've had that same job at Tableau. I had the same thing at Starbucks for the non-retail, like barista side of things, and spent a ton of years at Microsoft before that, and in various different recruiting roles, both global and the U.S. and agency recruiting before that, and then spent a bunch of time in Japan doing recruiting kind of earlier in my career. I'd say the wackiest, and I stopped counting when I hit about 15,000 interviews. I used to actually track that. I still track exactly how many offers I've made and how many acceptances I've had. But the weirdest situation in an interview that popped up, and this would be something I would definitely recommend not doing, was we had a kind of an interview blitz day at Microsoft where candidates were going through, and we had a bunch of rooms reserved, and so candidates would go to room A and then B and C and D and then pop out the end and debrief with them. And I was in the office next to interview room A, and about 10 minutes into the interview I just heard like rustling and crashing, and then the interviewer yelling, help, help, help. And so I went into the room, and he had ticked off the interviewee so badly that the guy was literally chasing him around the table trying to physically fight him. And so I would recommend never physically assault the person that you're interviewing with. If it's a bad interview, you can always just stand up and say, this is not the opportunity for me, and bow out. But
so that's a great lesson, everyone. We could probably end the webinar just on that. Please do not assault the folks that are interviewing you. That's crazy. Absolutely. That's got to be one of those you catch up with your coworkers after you get a drink and you say, this is like the absolute craziest thing.
We had a few beers that night.
Good. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, I know a few of you have just jumped on. We're really going to walk through what it would be like for any rep or sales leader, really anyone that's wanting to get a job, right? Like, we see that there's this job, we got to prep our resume, we got to go and do the application process, the interview process, all of that. So I believe we are going to jump into this conversation by actually looking at some resumes that we have. So we've had a lot of folks that have actually volunteered their resumes. We've redacted personal information, so there may be some sentences that may not make sense, but do your best to understand them. And so here is our first resume. This person is a sales leader. Can everyone, okay, good, everyone can see it. This person is currently a sales leader. He's a director, or they are a director of sales. And so I'm actually just going to zoom out a little and let us kind of scroll through it here real quick.
I see some good and some bad right off the bat.
Okay. Well, let's start with the top. So obviously the person's name is at the top. Let's kind of start with this section. I've seen this a lot. I think this is like more common with like more well-tenured folks. You know, I don't know if that's like a new thing or not. Dan, you said you instantly see something. What is it?
Yeah, so I'd say on the good side of things, you always want to have a resume that has layers to it. Like you'll pick up some resumes and you're like, wow, this thing is just flat and it just feels like work to go through it because visually the page is not broken up well. This one's broken up fairly well. It's also a sales. This is both a pro and con on this one. It's a sales resume, and sales leaders tend to have their eyes drawn to numbers. And so like the first thing that I see on this page is $30 million annually. There's a couple of other numbers in other places, which is good, but they could probably put a little bit more. On the negative, like that core strengths, I honestly never read that. I'll look at that top paragraph and see a little bit in there, but I get to the experience as fast as possible. I'm not saying take it out, but just don't spend hours of excruciating, like, do I do, problem solver, or like it's hard to read it. But then if you scroll down, I would say like, okay, that's a perfect depth right there. If you look at all those bullet points, there's not a lot of physical breakup between those. And so what happens is I would prefer if this person had 1 or 2 sentences describing the job and then maybe 3 or 4 bullet points that are their biggest wins, because without that breakup, those dots on the side end up like almost acting like a ball dropping, and people will spend less time on your resume because they'll just start scanning down through those bullet points faster and faster and faster. So I would do small paragraph, big wins, small paragraph, big wins, and then you get that depth and people will spend a bunch more time on your resume.
I would do something similar and different. First thing is that last bullet point, 104, like that should be your first bullet point.
Yeah,
like everything with numbers needs to be at the top. And I'm a big fan of the number first, right? So I would put 114%, led sales team to quota. The next bullet point, 29% growth over 2018. So that those bullet points really stand out from a number standpoint. I also know this is, and I'm not a professional resume guy, and I've read thousands, but certainly not as many as Dan and probably Caitlin. The paragraph thing describing what the company does, I actually want that to come below my achievements. I want that to come underneath a couple. I agree with Dan, like have just 3 or 4 bullet points. And then I like the diatribe because I want that to stand out. But I don't read these on a regular basis to hire somebody. So please just note that's a Richardism. That's how Richard would like to see it. But I'll defer to people in the trenches any day of the week. And then, same thing with also like 5 consultants, 8 distributors. Like those numbers need to get closer to the front of the sentence somehow. And so I'm always a big fan of the number first and then an explanation of that number. It feels awkward because it doesn't necessarily read grammatically correct, but that's just sort of my belief system.
Yeah, I agree with Richard on like calling out the numbers. For me, this reads a lot of a list of duties and not as much on the accomplishment side. So like tying to the ROI, like this is a great detailed list of what they've done in their role. However, I don't know how impactful that actually was by reading this. So, how effective were you as a leader and managing this team? Bringing up some of those ROIs and figuring out how to elaborate in a leadership capacity if that's what they're going for again. Kind of your ROIs in that overall capacity rather than just kind of your role and responsibilities would be my tidbit.
I have a question for Caitlin and Dan on this one. Like I look at the second bullet point. Something around sales techniques, strategies, KPIs, right? Like those are good buzzwords, but is there a better way to be more descriptive? And do you think it's important? Like identified, these were our best KPIs, adjusted taught 18 different sales I don't know. Is there something different or is it like, nah, Richard, that's pretty normal?
I mean, you could throw some things in there to be a little bit more descriptive of what it is. But I think Halise had asked a question, what would you put in the paragraph? That first and second bullet point would be examples of what would go in the paragraph. The paragraph's like, what's your job? Like, give me your job in an elevator pitch of like 2 sentences. Like, what do you do? But as the resume reader, I'm gonna hit that quick. And I'm going to spend my time looking at the bullet points that are underneath that. What did you actually accomplish? What did you achieve? And so the paragraph is just the brief description, but it almost, as bad as it sounds, just makes that eye break so that something goes down the page and it's not just those bullet points that drop you really, really fast.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Now, just a few questions. One, I know many of you kind of hinted on, well, let's get the numbers first and forward and then kind of explain it. If it said like 5 sales consultant, global channel, and then like 8 global partners, and then under the 5 consultants, like 75% at 110% of quota into, would that be more impressive than like, great, you've managed 5 people, but like,
what are they doing?
Yeah. Are they actually hitting their numbers? Would that be like more impactful?
I think hitting the numbers is more impactful, but I would change that opinion depending on the role I'm applying to.
Got it.
Like if it's a channel role, either one could come first. And I don't think there's be like, oh, we're not looking at that person because they put their channel stuff above their revenue.
Yeah.
I just want them higher to the top. I just want them to stand out.
So. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Heidi asked a really great question here. So many resumes are going through tech first. To be like, are those words that are in the job descriptions being checked in the resume? So is there a worry that the numbers are not going to be picked up because there may not be in that job description? Like if the algorithm is looking for certain keywords, what happens if there's more numbers and less words? Could that affect it?
Yeah, I've got having worked with basically every applicant tracking system that's out there. Maybe I'll jump in. So first of all, I'd say it really depends on the size of the company you're applying to, whether there's going to be that tech screen on the front end or not. Like when I was at Microsoft, we would post a job and you'd get thousands of applicants. So you would go in and you would put in, kind of the keywords that you wanted to filter out so that you had less resumes just because you just don't have the time. In smaller companies, I can tell you that an actual live human is probably looking at every single resume that's going in. So this isn't just a plug for small companies. You just know that if you're applying to those two different sized companies, that you're gonna get a different level of human touch. Now, to answer the question of do the numbers get weeded out? So the filter will be probably pulling things that are the keywords that are in the job description. So you want to have those in your resume so that when it goes through that tech filter, it gets to the human on the other side. The human will care about those numbers and will see them. And you have 2 humans that you got to get through. It's usually the recruiter to say, yes, I'm putting this in the yes pile. I want to screen this person. But ultimately, that's also going to be the person that's going to be the manager of the role is going to see it. And so, yes, I would pay attention to the keywords. And I used to tell people, and this still works, by the way, for some ATSs, that if you just copy the entire job description, paste it into the bottom of your resume, change the font color of that section of your resume to white and reduce it to like a 2-point font, you'll make it through the tech filter a lot of times because it'll pick up every single keyword in the job description by doing that. So
Get out of here. Really?
No.
You are not the first person
Look at
I've
the
heard
tricks.
say that.
I've never heard. That's amazing. Wow.
Now, there's a lot of ones that know about that now and weed that out as well, but that was an old trick that still sometimes works.
I
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead, Katie.
No, you're good. You're good, Caitlin.
I was just going to say, I think Dan brought up a really good point here of like always, I mean, my advice is like always be reviewing and revising your resume for the job. Like you can't go in with one resume for every single job that you're applying to, even if it's a similar role you're looking at. Like you need to be looking at that specific job and speaking to what that company is looking for, because as we'll get into, each job description is different as well. And so if you're looking, especially in some of these larger companies, to really get through that filter, that's key for what you need to be doing as well, to his point.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I'll throw in a little gotcha in there though, that a lot of systems, like let's say you're scattershotting and you're applying to very different jobs. So you have job 1, 2, and 3, and then you do tailored resume A, B, and C to line up for those jobs. A lot of them are you load up resume A for job 1, and like that's great, I've done my work there, but then you go in and you load up resume B for job 2, it overwrites resume A in job 1. Then you go and do job like your resume C for job 3, and it overwrites B and B then because it's already been overwritten. So like I would just encourage you, don't be really willy-nilly with the way that you're applying, because you could like tailor resume out of being selected by by you presenting yourselves as really different than the first version.
Yeah. Interesting. I love it. Well, let's jump into a second one. Here, let's make this a little bit bigger here for us. This person, I know them very well. Good peeps. So what do we see? What are some warning signs? Audience, what do you see so far? Once again, it's nice and short up here at the top. There's a lot happening. I'll give everyone kind of a minute. Yeah, no numbers. Great point, Heidi.
I mean, I don't. This feels. It almost feels like someone who doesn't have a lot of experience. Like it reads a little bit more like someone who just graduated from college, which I would not expect a very robust resume. I mean, if they can create one, great, but it's not enough. Like it would, yeah. I wouldn't even consider this, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. It looks really light. I don't see any major accomplishments called out other than just duties and responsibilities. It's also this person doesn't spend very much time in a job. So I don't know if that's, if those are, it looks like
different companies.
Yeah.
Does anybody care about that though? Do they really?
Yeah.
If I'm successful as a sales rep or a sales leader and I've bounced a little bit.
As long as the story makes sense and doesn't reek of, especially in sales, of I got in, I got ramped, I got put on a plan, I escaped.
And out, yeah.
Yeah. And this resume doesn't support a story to even, from my opinion, right. Like they're not telling a story to help me be like, okay, let's understand this reasoning a little bit. There's just words rather than, more than anything to not make me.
I have a question because I've been coaching people this way, particularly for 2020, right? Anything from February to this year, people are like, oh my God, I only had a couple of jobs. I'm like, dude, it was COVID. Like you have the best story in the world, right? And you may not get in from someone who has been somewhere through COVID. I get it, but it's a valid reason that people have jumped in the last year, and it's okay to say it, at least in my opinion. What do you guys think? You guys are like I said, you're on the front lines.
Yeah, I'd say that the COVID excuse is extremely valid. Like this is kind of an unprecedented time. Now, if you had 7 jobs in the 4 years preceding COVID, then your story is, you automatically have a shakier base that you're working off of. And to, Caitlin's point that she made a minute ago, like if this resume had said inside sales rep and I, blew out this quota and I did this and this and that. So I was promoted to lead sales rep. And then, I was headhunted because I did so well there and I moved to the next one. To me, that's a way better story than this, which feels like I'm running from job to job to job because maybe I'm not successful.
Now, I've got a question for y'all. And Heidi brought this up in the chat. I think it's an interesting point. For mothers who have to leave the workforce, because sometimes it's cheaper to not work versus have daycare and all that, right? What would you recommend they do? If it's been like 2-5 years, is it worth putting on your resume, I was a mother, and like have that in there to explain that gap? Because I feel like a lot of times people wouldn't even look at you if you have a 5-year gap on there.
Yeah,
you want to put something in there.
You're not legally required to do it, but hopefully you want to go to a company that has real humans and good people in it. And so if I see somebody that's a return to work mom, I actually give bonus points there. I'm like, I'm going to give this person more of a shot because they're trying to get back into the workforce. Let's give them a hand out or a hand up. And so, yeah, like individual preference, but like, I don't look negatively on that at all.
Yeah. And this is where like I advocate strongly for having a network to help connect you back as well. This is a big area that we focus on at Aspireship, is like helping people tell their story and being an advocate for introducing them to companies. Exactly to Dan's point, like hopefully you're looking at good companies and good humans that understand that and are supportive of that. And I think a lot of times it's having the advocacy of other people supporting you through this journey to get back into the workforce outside of just trying to put resumes out there will level you up and help get your foot in the door or looked at a little bit more quickly potentially than just trying to go blindly through, ATS systems in larger companies.
Mm-hmm. Do ATS systems pick up on that? I've never had to worry about ATS. So do they pick up if it says anything about parenting, or does it just mean they're a cruddy company if they actually have that as a keyword?
I don't think that's ever filtered out. From my experience, we've never filtered it out. It's just been more of like, do people put it on their resume for helping tell the story? Do they not, type thing?
Right. Yeah. And if you
I fully support it. Like I talk a lot about mental health, and I know for moms returning to work, whether it's post the child coming, being born and they're coming back from maternity, or fathers for paternity, and those things, I think it's important to share those things because that tells your whole story, right? It's, the smart companies are realizing, I think, that they're now hiring the whole human, right? Mm-hmm. They don't get to hire, and give that old excuse, which I used to, which was, oh, just leave all your problems at the door and come focus on your number. Like that was the old coaching way of doing things. And it was terrible. I was, it's just, and if the company doesn't hire you because of those things, then they weren't the right place anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was going to say that exact same comment. It's, you're not losing out on anything if a company weeds you out because of that. Like you're weeding them out, and so will other people, and those companies will either change or they will die. So
yep.
I love that. So what we would do to this resume is maybe throw some numbers in there, tell a little bit of a better story, and be prepared to explain yourself, it sounds like. So
yep.
Awesome. Okay, let's look at the second or the third one here. I'll zoom us in. This has a lot, I know. Let me make this bigger here. Okay. So I'll let everyone take a minute. Audience, if you see something interesting in here, drop it into the chat. Thank you, everyone, for all the great questions so far. I know there's a lot of numbers in this one already.
Caitlin, you go first. Dan and I've jumped ahead.
Yeah. There's a lot of good info here. I like a lot of this stuff. It's a wall of text, though. And so kind of to Dan's initial point, like there's got to be some breakup. You don't want to lose the engagement and interest. A lot of times, especially from a recruiter standpoint, like they're glancing and they're giving time, but they're not giving like 30 minutes to look at a resume when they're looking for, looking to read through and find qualified candidates for it. So I think that there could be a better way to structure this resume and break it up a little bit to call out some of these things. But the content I like. There are a lot of numbers here, but of also kind of breaking that down and figuring out like what are the top priorities that you're wanting to highlight, because you're almost kind of like over dumping the info to be like, well, okay, let's, have it all in the resume rather than having further conversation. It would be my initial feedback.
And one of the guests from the audience, they had just said it might be better to actually bold the job title, not the dates. So that's great.
I would agree with that. Yeah. You want to call out what you've done.
Yeah, and I like where the dates are in the job title.
Mm-hmm.
But keep in mind too that on this document, because I agree with the white spacing piece, right? On the bold side, you have the dates. You'd also have, and we can't see it, but it's shaded out the company and then whatever else was on the right. So there would be a little bit of that separation. I don't disagree that, but to then try to move that, I don't know, like that's the only thing I would say. Like, well, I kind of get it. I do think this is like, imagine if you were an SDR and someone told you to send this as an email, right? Like this is show up and throw up. Right? there's great stuff in here. Like it's so good. Like this is the kind of person I would want to hire. Mm-hmm. But I think you just revamp it a little bit. Cut it down where you can.
Well, and here's something too. So right here is usually where the company name is. This is the location. Do we need to have location for these? Does that even matter?
That's something that I'd say has changed over time a little bit. I've seen a trend recently where people are actually not even putting their address on the resume, because it does matter less and less where you physically are, where the role is. It's what can you do. So some companies will still want you in the office or still want you in that city. But I've had a lot of people that have just started dropping that, just so it doesn't, like, a filter doesn't weed you out because it sees, you live in Arizona, but the role is in Los Angeles. Who cares?
We've actually had a lot of people, a lot of friends that have used our address for like a Dallas job because they were going to move to Dallas anyways, regardless of if they got that specific job. But the systems are filtering them out because they don't want to pay, the companies don't want to pay a reload fee. But our friends are like, we're going there regardless. we just want this job. So it's very, very interesting.
Do you think that, again, this is an old school one, but, the whole willing to relocate, is that a good thing or a bad thing to put? Does it send that message of like, oh, we got to pay for them to move here? Or now that we're so virtual in many of the roles, at least most of us in the sales hacker community, it's not as important. But does that mean anything or mean nothing? You don't care?
I think it depends on if you know that the job requires you to be there or not.
Yeah, if it says like, you have to be in the office or, something like that, and you don't live in that city, like calling out that you're willing to move there, I think is fine. But for a lot of roles, if you can do them virtually, then I don't think it matters as much.
Now, one question that I've been seeing on resumes is education, certifications, all that seems to be at the bottom. Is that something that you should put more towards the top, or like does the placement of it really matter if you're not a recent college grad?
Yeah. I would say if you're not a recent college grad, put it at the bottom. Because what you've done after school matters a lot more than what you did in school. I was a graphic design major. I'm not making any money from designing anything, so it doesn't really matter. If you are a recent college grad and you don't have a lot of experience, then your biggest achievement is achieving that degree, and put it at the top.
Yeah. I think it goes to the role. Like I used to do healthcare recruitment where certifications and degrees, like they were actually pretty crucial to knowing if you were qualified or not. So that was always something that we looked at. So but other roles and duty, it just doesn't matter as much for some other areas. So depending on the job you're going for.
Yeah,
Awesome.
totally agree. Yeah, I can see that too with like an engineering resume,
Yeah.
like the different languages that you can program in near the top is probably a good call out.
Well, I'm sure their skills and experience would be very different from mine of Excel proficient, which we all know I still can't do a pivot table. So it doesn't really matter, but awesome. Well, we've really dug into the resumes and figuring out what we should have, how much, how little, the ball dropping. That's going to stick with me forever. I've never even considered that. Lots of really great information. So if we're walking through this getting a new job process, we have our resumes ready to go. Let's start looking at job descriptions. So I'm going to pop up the first one. Like I said, all 3 of the job descriptions that we're going to check out are from top software companies. So I'll just zoom in on these and let's look at this. First glance, Dan, what do you think?
Well, the very first thing that popped in my head was boilerplate. It feels like this is I've got a corporate account executive Northeast, go to the file cabinet, pull out this job description, post it. There's nothing that hooks me or grabs me other than if I wanted to work for this company and I was an account executive in the Northeast, I would come to this job description and I would apply. So there's nothing once I get here to get me super, super excited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of, I know we've blocked out the company name, but this is all strictly about the role. And I don't know towards the bottom if they have a little bit more cultural, but people are looking for more than just going into a job. This is, so that's at the bottom, but that's more of general highlight of benefits. That's not so much of this is why this is a really intriguing company and opportunity to work for.
So what would that mean? So I guess my question for you, Caitlin, is would you say move this kind of stuff to the top? So it's hey, this is about you first, and here's a little bit about why we think you'll love it. Or are you saying, no, they need to tell a little bit more about their story or combination of, but what does that mean?
I think to Dan's point of this just feels very stale and there was no elaboration of this is why we're hiring for this position again, or this is what is happening at the company causing this growth pattern and why we have an opening. It's just truly here's this corporate account executive and this is what you'll be doing in the role. Unless you're reading an about us section on the site, there's nothing that stands out about what makes the company an interesting company to work for through this description.
How does that, this is the question I always get, so sorry to take over.
No,
Katie.
you're fine.
6 years or more sales experience preferred. Granted, 1 year may not cut it for a 100K deal, right? I get it. How accurate is that when people put in there? Is it chosen randomly? Suppose I have 4 years, suppose I have 3 years. Should I apply? Am I not going to get chosen because I don't have 6?
I'll let Dan take that one.
Yeah. So for me, I've always been a believer that if you got 60% of what they're asking for and you believe in yourself, apply. Because you can have, and gosh, I'm remembering his face right now, but when I was in agency recruiting, I had a manager that would always kind of say the same thing over and over, which was, you can have 2 people, one person that has 10 years of experience, but really they've got 1 year of experience repeated 10 times. And you've got somebody with 4 years of experience and each one of those built on top of each other. I take the 4-year experience over the 10-year experience. So.
Why is that?
Just because if somebody's just keeps turning the wheel year in and year out and not actually growing or doing anything new, to me that's less exciting than somebody that constantly was growing and developing and improving themselves and trying new things. So I'm more apt to look at somebody that maybe doesn't hit all of the basic qualifications, and that's also something I encourage all of my recruiters to work with their hiring managers to find reasons to say yes, not reasons to say no.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, completely agree with that. We encourage people to be primed to say yes and not no, and understanding. I mean, from my standpoint, I totally agree. I think there's a level of competency that you need to be able to be successful in doing this job. To Richard's point of like closing deal sizes at or above 100K, you can't just walk on off the street probably with no experience doing that. But specific years of experience, specific SaaS experience, like all of that stuff, I'm a hard no on.
Well, funny thing, and you don't have to defend the company behind this job description, because I'm pretty sure it's my company, and I see why you'll love it here, and I know that's one of our catch things. So, like, to me, this is just a good thing of being like, I should be coaching my sales recruiters to make sure that it's a little bit less boilerplatey at the top, and let's throw a little bit of human interest in and something that'll catch people's eyes. So, if you had the ability to unmask it and it's us, that's totally fine. It's a good catch.
One thing that I think is really, really interesting, and this is just something I have just recently kind of learned, and I posted about this on LinkedIn today, is don't disqualify yourself before you give others an opportunity to do it for you. Yeah. Like, don't take yourself out of the running just because you think it may not work, because you could be incredibly shocked. And like, I shared my story today about like how I came to Sales Hacker, and Richard was a very integral part of it. So was Scott. And I very much like disqualified myself. I applied for a job I had no reason to apply for, and they are like, yeah, that might not work, but we've got something else and we think you'd be great. And I ended up here and I love it. But I definitely agree, like, you know, and we see this a lot looking at specific genders. Like, men are usually really good about just saying like, oh, screw it, I can do it, whatever, I'm going to be good at it, I can talk my way through it, I'm fine. And oftentimes for women, it's really tough for us because we want to believe in ourselves, we want people to believe in ourselves, and we really struggle with, oh, I don't know, maybe they won't say yes, I don't have 6, I have 5 years, I'll just wait an extra year and do this. And it's like, don't do that. Like, you have so many skills and resources, and like, especially nowadays with the power of LinkedIn, if it was me, I wouldn't even apply through this. I wouldn't waste my time with this. I would find the hiring manager and message them directly and say, hey, I see you've got this job, I would like to apply. What would you recommend I do? And for them, they've got incentive. Most companies are giving spiffs for, passing resumes along inside. So they'll probably pass your resume along if you have a shot. But yeah, so that's my 2 cents to it. Mitchell made a really great question in here, and Mitchell said, if you're making a transition from more traditional sales roles to SaaS and aren't coming in with SaaS experience, do you think that's a really big red flag? Is SaaS sales really that different?
No, I'll jump in on this one. If you can position your success properly with quotas, particularly if you've got well-known brands like Nike and people, name fortune companies that you can drop. I do not think it matters. I know a lot of people love to put it in there. I don't know why. Look, if you're selling Boeing airplanes and now you're going to go to McDonnell Douglas, okay, yeah, some industry experience matters. Like, I get it, but I don't see it that way, and it kind of, you can tell it kind of irks me when I see it, but I'm also not a recruiter in a SaaS world, so.
Yeah, we agree. This is what we try to help people overcome. I mean, Aspireship's standpoint is helping people transition their previous sales experience or new to sales into SaaS companies and tech companies. On the premise of like, that doesn't make you a more qualified candidate. What makes you a more qualified candidate is showing a lot of the behavioral characteristics, your tenacity, your interest, your eagerness to learn, your coachability. I mean, all of the things that are going to lend you to be successful, not necessarily the experience. There's so many different verticals, even within SaaS, that like more times than not, you're going to be learning a new product anyway. And so if you can exhibit a lot of the behavioral characteristics, that in our view is a lot more important than having previous SaaS experience, and it should not be a disqualifier. But there's definitely certain viewpoints on people believe that needs to be required, but I think it's more and more we're seeing a wave of a lot of companies and leaders not believing that needs to be a requirement. So
awesome. Well, and speaking of things that may not need to be a requirement, I remember in high school spending hours upon hours figuring out how to write a cover letter. What do we think, panel? Are cover letters still important, or are they just a waste of time? Caitlin, what do you think?
I think, again, it kind of depends on like where you're applying. I think that there's a lot of different avenues that you can take the approach of the cover letter, and recording a quick video and sending it via LinkedIn to the recruiter or the hiring leader or whatever research you can find. I think especially in sales, like, you need to do the job to show that you want the job. And so if you start applying some of the skills that you would be doing as an SDR, start doing some cold outreach to people and doing it in a way that is like, the cover letter has historically always been kind of like the catch point to get them to know you a little bit, adding more of the human aspect to who you are. And so I personally think that there's more effective ways to go about that by showcasing that. But I know that some companies still really do require them. So I think of just kind of leaning into what is requested from the application. If they request one, obviously do it. But I'm not one who like would say you must have this in order for me to think that you're a strong candidate.
Gotcha. Richard, what do you think?
I actually had someone ask me this question the other day, and I was kind of like, you can have one, but I don't, I said, go do some research on it, because I'm not the guy to answer this question, right? I think it's nice to have. I don't think anybody's going to not hire you or hire you because of it. Maybe if you're going to some Fortune, accounting role, maybe, but in sales, look, we all know by a fact that we're all too impatient. We all eat fast. I bet 70% of the people on this call, if I said who eats fast, would all say yes, me, right? Like, so sales leaders think that way too. So they just want to get to the good stuff. They'll ask for the story later, right? So that's sort of how I see it. I don't think they're required, but I can see where sometimes it just feels good because that's what mommy told me to do, because that's what mommy and daddy did, right? Like, I'm at least old enough to remember when actually I think a cover letter actually did matter. So, but I don't think they matter anymore.
Say every now and then one will catch my eye, but a really fun and creative one will like have me give somebody an extra chance. A really poorly written one will, could knock somebody out of consideration. And then the 95% in the middle they're all the same.
So I've got just a question that kind of came to mind based off of what you just said, Dan. And like, because we are running out of time, just like a yay or nay, what do we think of colorful resumes? Just kind of going back real quick. Every resume we saw was black and white, very like businessy. What do we think of slightly out of the box for a sales role? Normally we see those in more like marketing focused. Dan, would that catch your eye enough to say like, oh, we'll give this person a shot? Let's see.
Yeah, like a little bit of color does help to catch your eye. I just say, just don't overdo it. I see some people that get like into like really crazy like designs and 1 out of 10 of those again like will catch your eye and you're like, I'm in. Like the best resume I've ever seen was a guy who basically his whole resume looked like a whiteboard. And it was so unique, and a guy named Rob Wolf still works for Microsoft that like I interviewed him like about 10 seconds after seeing the resume. I just picked up the phone and called him. But I would say the vast majority, just keep it classy, do something that pops the page a little bit, but don't go overboard.
Caitlin, what about yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think doing a little bit to stand out, but not, if it's too much, then it's almost a turn off, kind of the balance of the cover letter. Not too much to make it be where you don't want to even entertain it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is if the accomplishments are there, and the numbers are there, and the hitting goal and that kind of stuff is easy to find, you could still squeak by, I bet, on Dan and Caitlin if it was, It was too colorful. Like the numbers would get there, but you got to find that balance, and it's hard too, because if you're going through a system, or if HR sees it first versus sales, you really have two different mindsets. You have two different buyers, right? And sometimes, when you're not as lucky as Dan, where you have sales recruiters who Dan is trained to look for things, HR doesn't really know. They're just like, oh, sure, here you go. So that's why I'm so focused on the results and the accomplishments and getting them to as top and invisible as possible.
Absolutely. I know we've only got a few minutes left. So the first thing, Dan, whenever you look at this, is this what you were I guess all of you have kind of brought up this point of telling a little bit, what is this opportunity in getting the boilerplate at the bottom where it should belong? Is this more on par?
Yeah, I'd say anything that shows that a human created this, to me, gets bonus points. If it feels like it was written, I'm not saying that lawyers aren't humans, but if it feels lawyerly or corporate-y, then it does its job, but it's not going to excel.
Yeah. Richard, what are your thoughts on this job description? Anything that people would need to look out for or want to ask deeper questions on?
I'm less concerned about the job descriptions. I'm more concerned about people knowing how to do a better job of interviewing, right? Particularly right now, the job market's so tight, right? Like, even if you've been successful, people are just ready to leave, right? Like, I know, we're reading about it, we're seeing it, we're hearing it. The job, the unemployment rate's really down. It's a good time to be, to a certain extent, a recruiter, because you can probably find some good candidates. So I'm more concerned about the interview, whether it's the person conducting the interview as a leader or the candidate going in. Because to me, I look at this as a rep and I would be like, yeah, I can do it. I'm applying and I'm done and I'm gone, right? Like, I'm done, right?
Yeah. On to the next. Caitlin, what do you think before we jump into the next section?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of to Richard's point, like, I feel like anybody could apply to this job. There's not a whole lot that they're asking for. There's not a ton of information. But so I think more than anything, if you're going to have, erring on the side of brevity here, of like, elaborate more through the interview process and have it be a really stellar experience from that standpoint.
Perfect. Well, speaking of interviews, let's shift into that, applications. They're all applications are applications. So we spent a lot of time during the resume conversation figuring out how to hack the system, what to do for your application, figuring out you can email them directly to the hiring manager, email them to Dan Whitney if you'd like to, or email them to me if you want to come work for Outreach, because I get a kickback, so please do that. And just kidding.
No, you do.
I don't know if that's like,
don't send them to me, send them to her, because I get a referral bonus. I don't get referral.
But Richard, you make a really, really great point. Whenever we look at interviews, because there is this whole great resignation idea and everyone's now going into new jobs, what do you need to do to prepare for your interview to really stand out compared to others that are going to be competing for that role?
You, as a candidate, you want to ask better questions. This is one of the questions I encourage everybody to ask. And there's an ebook I wrote that's on my website if you want to go find it. But it's, hey, Dan, or, hey, if you could snap your fingers for your sales team and tomorrow 3 things would change, what 3 things would they be? Most hiring managers will go, that's a good question. I haven't thought about it. And they'll come up with 1, 2, and 3. And then my follow-up question, this is the killer one. And I don't want it to be, you don't want to be condescending, so don't sound like me. You want to say, well, internally, what prevents that from happening so quickly? And it's a culture question. And it's, how hard is this guy or this woman going to push? And because that's what you're trying to do. Like, remember, they're not interviewing you. You're interviewing them, particularly now with the job market. Like, they need you a whole lot more than you need them. Right now, if you're in the candidate space where, hey, I've got bills and a kid and insurance, like, go get a job. Like, take something maybe you wouldn't normally take. Go take care of your health and your family and those things. But those are the kind of questions I want to hear. right? Those are the kind of questions I want people to ask, because I want them to know that sort of by the end, I'll say, look, I know I ask different questions, but Dan, the reason I do it is because I'm trying to do discovery. And I just want you to understand that this is how I try to do this. So I can now take what I did, put them in a unique position, and then explain later, like, this is what you're hiring me for, to ask these kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that. Caitlin, what are you coaching your folks over at Aspireship to do?
Yeah, I love Richard's question. I mean, that's actually one that we recommend, of kind of is exactly as he said, like the discovery, things that you care about, things that are going to lend you information on their leadership style, things that are going to lend you more information about the company culture, rather than like, tell me about your company culture, because you're going to get an answer that you could read on their website, when you ask it in that way. So figure out, I think, we really encourage people to be articulate, have a huge list of questions, because half the time your questions will get answered through that interview, and you don't want to show up at the end of being like, well, you answered everything, thank you. It's totally appropriate to take your portfolio out and be like, yeah, actually, I do have some questions. The other thing that we recommend people like know who you're interviewing with and what their role is. Ask questions that are appropriate to them. If you're meeting with an executive, ask C-level executive questions. Like, what information are you wanting to gain from them? You're not going to want to ask them, what are the expectations of this role and what are my daily duties? Like, that's going to be a big turnoff if you're asking a C-suite level person about that. So just be mindful of like, your questions prepared. Don't ask the same questions to everybody, obviously, but diving into like what you care about, what's going to lend you the most information to make an impactful decision as you're evaluating your scorecard at the end of the interview to see where they're ranking as a company in your interest too.
Absolutely. And Dan, I'm sure you've been through many of these interviews yourself. What questions would you encourage hiring managers to stop asking?
Ones that don't tie to anything. Like
Tell me this pin.
which appliance are you? That is, unless they're checking for your, like, it's job where you have to, think creatively and like random
It's
weird
appliances.
situations. Yeah. It's, I encourage hiring managers to ask, evidence-based questions that you can actually dig in. And when I interview people, I usually will throw out a scenario with a basket of questions and then let the candidate, basically like walk whatever road through that they want to. So it'd be like, give me an example of the most challenging hiring manager that you ever worked with. Why were they challenging? What was the situation? Like, how often were you working with them? If they were a 0 on 100, 0 to 100 scale, when you got them, did you get them to a 17? And what would it have taken to get them to a 25? Like, so it's like a whole bunch of questions all together. And then I just let people talk. And then it's more of a conversation. But from the candidate side, I would have your list of questions, but I would also, and you kind of need to practice this, be in be in the mode where if you get a question, you answer it and ask a relevant question back before you get the next question. And the reason why is that'll feel more like a ping pong, match where you get a question, you fire a question back off. It'll feel more conversational versus if you're only answering their questions. It's the typical where you see somebody with a ping pong paddle and they're just, hitting the ball against a wall and it comes back to them and they keep going. You're the wall in that. And that's less exciting than the person that you're actually playing live against.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, we have 1 minute left. So if there's one piece of advice that you would impart on these attendees, what would that be? And Caitlin, I will start with you.
Have energy around what you're going for. That's going to help you stand out as a candidate and really help you understand your enthusiasm of what you want in the market and your why, and knowing that.
I like that. Dan, what about yourself?
I would say if you're making a move because there's some negative thing that you're moving away from, take that negativity, put it in a box, and don't let it enter the interview at all. It will taint you very, very quickly. And just button right on to Caitlin's comment of, if you go in with positive energy and like real enthusiasm, that goes miles in an interview.
I love that. Richard, take us home.
Yeah, so I would say that you have to treat your job search as a process. When you apply to a company, you fill in whatever resume tool they have. You go and make the best assumption on who you think the direct hiring manager is, and you connect with them on LinkedIn and say, hey, I just filled in my resume, or I just applied, who else should I talk to? I didn't tell you to go to the HR, figure out someone in HR or the CEO, and hit up like 4 or 5 people at the company, right?
Yeah.
Don't worry. What happens if they all compare notes? Like they're going to think wow, this guy's great, or this woman's doing her job. Like this is sales. Then this is the catch. Really pick up the phone, call them too.
Yeah.
Even if you leave them a voicemail. Hey, I just sent you an email. Hey, I just applied. Hey, I just LinkedIn with you. I want to talk to you too. Like not enough people are doing it, and it will help you rise to the top. I promise you. So.
I love that. Wow. Thank you. This was an absolutely amazing session. I just dropped everyone's links to either their companies and their LinkedIn. So make sure you connect with them. If you have any questions, come ask them at saleshacker.com. But this was an amazing session. I hope you all found it super helpful. If you've got any feedback, send it my way. And I will say thank you to our amazing panelists, and have a fabulous rest of your week, everyone.